you haven't been working on JSX UI for a while. You got sidetracked on another big project. So what is that big project?
Well, as one does with a developer, they
Yeah.
have 20,000 ideas. You're like, I'm gonna do the next one right away before the other one's finished. No, so the new latest project I've been working on is called OmniDoc, and that really is a solution for documentation for JavaScript's code bases specifically, or TypeScript if you're using TypeScript. And that allows you to build a fully customized documentation solution. So, looking at other things in the industry, I've just never really been uh, happy with like the off the shelf solutions. And so and really just any company I've worked at, I worked at Frame.io, which is a video collaboration company, and the bar there for creating like really good user interfaces and experiences is just really high. Like we would record a video and scrub through every single frame trying to make sure that it was just everything's on point, and to carry that quality through to our documentation was really hard. And so I helped build a custom doc site there, and I'd built custom doc sites prior. So when I worked on this larger design system before, I built a Gatsby site, which was just like took forever to do because I'm trying to learn GraphQL, and I'm like, why am I learning GraphQL to build a doc site? Thankful for it in some sense, I guess, because I was able to get exposure to those things. And it was just always hard. It was really hard to build a custom doc site. I think me being a designer as well, and I think a lot of folks, you want to do something custom. You want to add personality to even your doc site. You want to carry your brand through to your documentation site. And so this is something I've been very passionate about and wanted to solve. And kind of why I put JSX UI on hold. I wasn't able to get what was out in my head enough or be able to iterate quickly enough uh, to formulate these ideas. And I think documentation is a really great place for that. It's a reflection of like what your code base is doing. And so, yeah, to get into like what OmniDoc specifically is doing is providing a way to type check your code blocks. So that's as far as like running the TypeScript compiler across all of your code blocks. And this is to make sure you don't show someone code that's not going to work. And we've all done this where you're like, oh, I had to get this PR out or whatever, and I forgot to update this one property that I changed. Just like we type check our code, we'll type check your code blocks. And then another like large feature is just automated API references. So I went deep on the TypeScript compiler to like figure out how to build a automated API reference. I think again, like things off the shelf were just a little either too constrained or they didn't do enough. So if you've ever used like React DocGen, um, they give you enough information and it's great, but then these projects will die off or people aren't maintaining them, and it's totally understandable. Open source is really, really hard, and you're not getting paid for like probably not getting paid for it. And so it was just kind of trying to fill that gap in the industry, especially for the projects that I've been working on. And to dog food myself, that's something I get to use every day. And OmniDoc is built with OmniDoc, and so I get to make it better in that sense, and then work with folks as well.
As a maintainer of one of those poorly maintained React DocGen packages, I can definitely relate. So what did you find lacking in those other than maintenance?
Hopefully, I don't say anything that's too no. I'm just
No, it's fine. I realize I'm probably the worst open source person ever. I do not check my GitHub notifications.
don't. No one does it. There's too many. No, I'm just. Yeah. I think the biggest thing I wanted to solve was compared to other solutions was just again like meeting you where you're at as a developer. A lot of folks are capable of building solutions, and I've even found I did a major release of OmniDoc to help fix these my own issues of trying to get like a good API out for folks to use. And I think that's the hard part about API design. You just have to iterate on it. And I think you should try to really find this most simple solution that doesn't do too much, but it does just enough. And so that's kind of what I'm trying to find with OmniDoc is that it's just a tool set that you can pick individual pieces. If you just want the code block component, just use the code block component. If you want to use what I'm calling collections, you can use collections. And collections are specifically just a way to you can think of like Storybook, for example. Storybook allows you to map over all of your examples, and there's kind of a DSL there, like a custom API. And I wanted to get rid of those things. Like I don't want a custom DSL as much as I can help it. And so in this case, in OmniDoc, collections really are just a little bit of sugar around modules. And so it allows you to query a set of modules, you pass a file pattern, and you get back data about your file system. And it's kind of the implicit rules that we follow if you work in a design system. Hey, we use an index.ts file, and maybe we don't. I don't like to use index.ts files, and I want to use a button.tsx explicitly or something like that. We all come up with these like implicit rules, and then people don't follow them, or the code base gets out of hand, etc. And so with this new architecture, I'm really excited about able to not just type check your front matter, for example. You can type check just any export that's coming out of a module. So this allows you to grab a. I think a perfect example is examples, which is funny. You can grab examples in your code base similar to like storybooks, or if you want to call them stories. Still, I don't care as the library. And then you can type check to say like, hey, every example should attach this sort of information to it, or these examples should be formatted in a particular manner. And you're really just using what you already know. Like, you can use the types that you already know, and that'll throw a type error, or it'll throw an error if it doesn't find a front matter export. And so this moves beyond MDX and kind of goes across like the whole system. And so trying to really just solve that portion of it. Yeah.
When I first read the name, I thought that it was like you were fully type checking MDX, because this is a problem that I've encountered many a time when authoring content is I want to use MDX. I also really like TypeScript and I like static analysis, but seemingly I can't type check my whole MDX file just to like make sure that it's what I intend, especially if I'm using components that I've imported. So does MDX aim to help with that problem at all, or is it like lower level?
It's a little bit lower level now. So
Okay,
prior for folks, it used to be called MDXTS. It's now called
sorry.
OmniDoc. No worries at all. And that's the whole reason for the rename is I realized I wasn't capturing, or the project kind of just grew. It was really just about type checking your code blocks at first, and then grew out of that. And I do want to mention that there are solutions out in the industry as far as I think Shiki 2 slash is a project that will help you do similar things. But what you run into is when you're trying to do API references with the TypeScript compiler, and then they're doing their own type checking with code blocks, you run into performance issues like pretty immediately, especially in an enterprise situation. And I used to have Frame. I remember my first pass on things. I would just like timed out our Netlify builds, and so it was just like 15-minute builds because the type checking was just. It's really easy to be naive with some of these solutions. Pulled React DocGen off the shelf and put it in all my components. We had an Next.js application, so get static props is calling this thing, but it's using a new instance on every like it spins up the TypeScript compiler every single time, and so you need to be very careful about how you use these tools while being very powerful. Just trying to, yeah, help type check those things. So
is this really sort of built for cases where you're like using React specifically, you're building a product with React or an API with React, and you're trying to document that? Or is it just like it's broader than that, but like handles that use case particularly well?
it does handle the React use case particularly well, like mainly because of server components. So I'm utilizing server components in a lot of the components that you get. Whereas, and I straddled this line because, right, this is applicable, especially this new collections concept I have is applicable outside of React. You don't need React to use this. It's just helping you gather modules and render the output of them. But similar to JSX UI, I kind of want to lean fully into a language or a framework to get the most out of it. And so it's been, a straddle of that with OmniDoc for sure. But yeah, I want to get into just like expressing this new paradigm of server components that we have. Like we just got a new tool, and we can go back to first principles and what are all these new things that we can do with this. And I found a lot of use cases, particularly in documentation. I was in the middle of almost being done with this project. Server components came out, and I stopped and rewrote it because I didn't want to put this thing out that I didn't, wholeheartedly believed in. And I saw that server components could help fill a nice gap here of the performance, like things of like performance issues, and right, we're not shipping a bunch of client stuff, like client code, and so yeah.
Yeah, I've on and off been rebuilding Storybook also, and had almost the exact same thing happen to me. I built this thing entirely on Vite, leaned into the bundler system there, no server components, and as you can imagine, things like property documentation generation, all of those like heavy things just slowed the build process down, made it super complicated. Rebuilding with server components was like a breath of fresh air because it was like all of these hard problems where I was communicating between computer A and computer B and like having to think about all of it. With server components, it's just like, oh, I want property documentation, make a component that does it, put it in a suspense boundary, and voila, we have data sharing between the front and back end, and it's not all that slow when you're in dev mode.
Yeah, that's a perfect a call out as far as using being able to use suspense for this. And so this refactor that I just did, is large refactor, I baked in, I wanted to make it really easy for you to use to document. That's like the whole point of this project. And I had like exported types on this field that you get. You created a source before, and then you get back the source and it gives you these exported types. I was running into similar problems though. I'm like, crap, this thing is slow as shit. Like it is so bad. I don't want to put this out. And I really haven't even talked about it on X, or Twitter, formerly Twitter, about these things because, you know, a little bit embarrassed. I'm like, I'm trying to put this thing out and I want to make it performant. And so I went back and did a large refactor of this TypeScript analysis. And now everything's on a separate thread, and the beauty of it is it uses suspense locally. And so it's something that I don't think a lot of folks probably care about or even talk about, but we're all focused on production and using these with APIs. This is essentially an API. I'm talking to the TypeScript compiler. It's essentially a language service that I've built, like a custom language service for it. And so now it can communicate off thread and everything is extremely snappy. It's where I've always like imagined this library to be. It looks a little wonky right now, at least in dev, because you move around and the code blocks aren't syntax highlighted yet, but that's because they're using suspense. And so it'll just show plain text, and that allows you to like move really quickly in local dev, or make a hot module update, like replacement. And yeah, suspense works beautifully there. I have a fallback state, yeah, which again is plain text, and then they just kind of all come in as the server is able to respond once it's under pressure. So yeah, love it.